Dolls have long been a source of both comfort and terror. Their painted smiles, frozen in time, are meant to bring joy. But what happens when those lifeless eyes seem to watch you, follow you, even when no one else is around? Throughout history, reports of dolls moving on their own, whispering in the night, or returning after being discarded, have sent chills down the spines of skeptics and believers alike. In this collection, we explore 4 chilling true stories of dolls that defied explanation. From a toy that refused to stay thrown away to one that left its owners plagued with illness and fear, these stories will make you think twice before bringing an old doll into your home. Turn the lights down, check your shelves, and prepare yourself for these terrifying tales of dolls that were anything but ordinary. Welcome to Sterling Short Stories. Step inside the story, but only if you dare. Story number 1. A doll's endless hair.
I was only 6 when my father brought the doll home. He had traveled to a neighboring town for business and returned with a gift, a small, delicate porcelain doll with dark, piercing eyes and straight black hair. Her silk kimono was soft to the touch, a deep crimson embroidered with golden chrysanthemums. "This is for you, Aiko," he said, placing the doll in my hands. "She will keep you company." I named her Haina. She became my closest companion, sitting on my bedside table while I slept, cradled in my arms when I felt lonely. I whispered my secrets to her, shared my fears and dreams. She was just a doll, but she felt more. When the sickness took me, it happened quickly. Fever burned through my body, turning my nights restless and my days a haze of weakness. My mother wept as she wiped my forehead, my father pacing outside my room in helpless frustration. I clutched Haina tightly, her presence oddly soothing against the endless waves of fever. Then one night, in the thick of my delirium, I saw her move, just a twitch, a tilt of the head. It was small, subtle, a trick of my fever-ridden mind, I told myself. Dolls don't move, dolls don't breathe. But in the moonlight, I swore I saw the rise and fall of her tiny chest, as if she were waiting for me. I did not survive the illness, or at least, that is what the doctors told my parents. I was gone for several minutes, no pulse, no breath, my small body limp and lifeless. My mother had screamed, her cries shattering the stillness of the room. My father had collapsed to his knees, clutching his chest as if his own heart had stopped alongside mine. But then, I returned. A deep breath, a sharp gasp, my eyes flying open to see my mother's tear-streaked face hovering above me. I was weak, unable to speak for days, but I was alive. Yet, something had changed, and so had Haina. At first it was my mother who noticed. "Aiko, did you cut your doll's hair?" she asked one morning, as she braided my own. I shook my head. We examined Haina together, her once short black hair now brushing the tips of her tiny porcelain hands. My mother frowned, puzzled, but said nothing more. Weeks passed. The hair continued to grow. First it reached her waist, then the floor. We trimmed it, thinking it must be some trick of the material, some strange fiber we did not understand. But each time we cut it, it returned. Longer, thicker. My father, once dismissive, now refused to touch her. My mother would pray under her breath whenever she saw the doll sitting in the corner of my room, her dark eyes unblinking, watching. It was as if she were alive. I began waking up in the middle of the night, the air thick with something unseen, something wrong. At first I thought it was the wind, the creaking of our old wooden home, the natural sounds of the night, until I heard my name, a whisper, faint, right beside my ear. I sat up, heart pounding, my gaze immediately falling on Haina. She sat where I had left her, unmoved, untouched, yet I felt her presence more than ever before. The night my mother saw Haina move was the night my father took her away. My mother had gone to check on me, to tuck me in, when she let out a strangled cry. My father rushed in to find her, pressed against the wall, her face drained of color, her hands trembling as she pointed toward the doll. She turned her head. My mother whispered. She looked at me. That was enough. The next morning, my father took Heine to the temple, to the monks who would know what to do. I cried when he took her. But deep down, I knew she could not stay. She was not just a doll. The monks accepted her with solemn faces, nodding as my father explained her unexplainable nature. They placed her in a shrine, locked safely away. But still her hair grows. I have never gone back to see her. I do not need to. I feel her presence still lingering in my dreams, in the corners of darkened rooms, in the whisper of the wind at night. I know she is waiting, and one day she will return to me.
Story number 2, Mandy's Watchful Eyes.
I had been working at the Paranormal Museum for just over 6 months when I first encountered Mandy. My job was straightforward: catalog artifacts, assist visitors, and make sure nothing went missing. It wasn't the most thrilling position, but the quiet suited me. Then I met her. Mandy sat in a glass case at the far end of the exhibit hall, a porcelain doll with cracked, pale skin and deep, glassy eyes. Something about her unsettled me immediately. Maybe it was her faint, frozen smile. Maybe it was the way her eyes seemed to follow me no matter where I stood. The other staff joked about her, passing around the old rumors, how the doll would move on its own, how electronics near her case would malfunction, how visitors swore she had whispered to them. I laughed along with them, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Mandy was more than just a doll. The first time I noticed something unusual was during an inventory check. The museum had closed for the night, and I was the only one left inside. I walked through the exhibits, clipboard in hand, checking each display against the records. Then, I heard it, a soft, muffled sound. Almost like crying. I froze, my pen slipping from my fingers. The sound was faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere behind me. I turned slowly, my gaze landing on Mandy's case. She hadn't moved. Of course not. But the sound seemed to be coming from right where she sat. My rational mind told me it was nothing. The building was old, full of creaks and groans. But my gut told me otherwise. That night, I left in a hurry. It wasn't long before the electrical disturbances started. Security cameras covering Mandy's case would flicker and shut off, only to turn back on moments later. Lights near her display would dim, sometimes even burst. One evening while closing up, I checked the footage from the previous night. The moment the camera panned to Mandy, the screen filled with static. I tried to rationalize it. Faulty wiring. An old system. But then my phone started acting up too. One night, as I locked up the museum, my phone screen glitched, distorting as if something was interfering with the signal. For a fraction of a second, I thought I saw something. A blurry figure, small, childlike, just on the edge of the screen. I blinked, and it was gone. One morning I arrived at the museum to find the staff in a frenzy. A small artifact. An old silver locket had vanished from its locked display case overnight. There were no signs of forced entry, and the security footage showed nothing unusual, except of course for the brief moment of static, when the camera faced Mandy's case. It was a coincidence, I told myself. It had to be, but deep down, I wasn't convinced. Later that day, while retrieving supplies from the back room, I heard something fall behind me. I turned just in time to see the missing locket lying on the floor, right in front of Mandy's case. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. Visitors loved taking pictures of Mandy, intrigued by the stories surrounding her. Some claimed that strange distortions appeared in their photos, shadowy figures, streaks of light, unnatural blurs. One afternoon, a family came in with a young girl who insisted on posing next to Mandy. The parents snapped a few photos and thanked me before heading out. Later I saw them standing by the entrance, whispering to each other, looking pale. Curious, I walked over. "Is everything okay?" I asked. The father hesitated before showing me his phone. In the photo, His daughter stood beside Mandy's case, smiling. But next to her, in the reflection of the glass, was another face, small, pale, eyes wide and hollow. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. When I looked back at Mandy's case, her reflection was just her own. That night, I made a decision. I had stayed at the museum longer than I intended, but this was too much. I handed in my notice the next morning. I didn't explain why. What could I say? That a doll had been watching me, waiting for me. On my last shift, I walked past Mandy one final time. Her cracked porcelain face remained unchanged, her glass eyes unblinking. But as I turned away, I thought I heard something so soft, so faint, I almost didn't register it. A whisper. A goodbye.
Story number 3. Let it go, if you can.
I still remember the day my daughter Mia received the doll. It was her 6th birthday, and she had been obsessed with Frozen for months. When her grandmother handed her a beautifully wrapped box, she squealed with excitement. Inside was an Elsa doll, dressed in a glittering blue gown, her plastic face molded into a cheerful, wide-eyed smile. When Mia pressed the small button on its chest, the doll sang "Let It Go" in a soft, mechanical voice. I found it a little eerie, but Mia was in love. That was all that mattered. At first, everything was normal. Mia played with the doll constantly, brushing its synthetic hair, making it twirl across the floor. It became her favorite toy, and I thought nothing of it. A few months later, things started to change. One afternoon, Mia ran up to me, holding Elsa to her chest. "Mommy," she whispered, wide-eyed. "She's speaking Spanish." I frowned. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Mia pressed the button. Instead of the usual "let it go," the doll recited a phrase in Spanish. I didn't even know it could switch languages. I checked the back of the doll for a language setting, but found nothing. I figured Mia must have accidentally activated some hidden feature and shrugged it off. But then, it got stranger. Over the next few weeks, the doll would talk on its own, not when someone pressed the button, just randomly, in the middle of the night, or when Mia wasn't even playing with it. I would hear its little voice echo from Mia's room when she was fast asleep. I told myself it was a glitch, maybe something wrong with the wiring. Toys did that sometimes. But deep down, I felt uneasy. One night, I decided to take the batteries out. I wanted to prove to myself that it was all in my head, that the doll wasn't really speaking on its own. I pried open the compartment, pulled out the small AA batteries, and set the doll on Mia's toy shelf. That night, I woke up to a soft, tinny voice in the darkness. "Let it go. Let it go." I bolted upright in bed, my heart slamming against my ribs. I could hear it coming from Mia's room. I ran down the hall, flicked on the light, and there it was. Elsa sitting on the floor singing. Without batteries, I snatched the doll and shook it, as if I could force it to make sense. But it was silent again, limp in my hands. Mia stirred in bed, rubbing her eyes. "Mommy," she murmured sleepily. "Why are you mad at Elsa?" I didn't answer. I took the doll and shoved it in the kitchen drawer. By now, I was done with Elsa. I didn't care how much Mia loved it. I wanted it gone. The next morning, I tossed it into the trash bin outside. I didn't tell Mia. I didn't want to hear her beg me to keep it. But the next day, when I went to grab my coffee, Elsa was sitting on the kitchen counter. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands trembled as I picked it up, staring at its painted blue eyes. "Mia," I called, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Did you take Elsa out of the trash?" Mia peered up at me from the couch, frowning. "What? No." I swallowed hard. That night, I drove to a park 10 miles away and threw Elsa into a public dumpster. I stayed up late, listening, waiting, but nothing happened. For a moment, I let myself believe it was over. Then, the following morning, I opened Mia's closet to grab her shoes. Elsa tumbled out, landing at my feet. I screamed. I called my husband, voice shaking, and told him everything. He was skeptical at first, but when he saw the look in my eyes, he didn't argue. "I'll take care of it," he said firmly. That night he drove 40 miles out of town and got rid of the doll. I didn't ask any questions about where. He returned late. He was tired. He then hugged and kissed me good night. The next morning, we both waited, expecting it to return. But it didn't. I finally breathed again. Days passed, then weeks. No more singing in the night. No more eerie appearances. It was finally over. Or so I thought. Months later, we got a package in the mail. There was no return address, no markings, just a plain box sealed with duct tape. My stomach twisted as I sliced it open. Inside was Elsa. Her blue dress was stained with dirt, her plastic hands scratched and scuffed. She had returned. I called my husband in a panic. He swore he had gotten rid of it. We stared at the doll, neither of us knowing what to do. Then my husband had an idea. "I'll send it to Mark," he said, referring to his old friend from college. As a joke, he boxed it up again, wrote Mark's address on the package, and sent it off. Days later, Mark texted him a picture. Elsa tied to the front of his truck, a thick cord wrapped around her waist. "Nice prank," Mark wrote. "She's riding with me now." We laughed, finally able to shake off the fear that had gripped us for months. As of now, Elsa hasn't come back, but sometimes I still check the mail, expecting to see another package, just in case.
Story number 4. Doll that follows.
I didn't want the doll. I didn't even like dolls. But when my grandmother passed, it was the one thing she left specifically for me. A delicate porcelain figure with glass eyes, too bright, too reflective. Her dark brown hair cascaded down her tiny shoulders, and she wore a faded lace dress, yellowed with time. My mother insisted I take it. "She wanted you to have it, Elise," she said, pressing it into my hands. It meant something to her. I wanted to argue, to tell her it was creepy, that I didn't need some relic from the past staring at me in my bedroom. But guilt won out. I wrapped the doll in a blanket and placed it in my suitcase before leaving my grandmother's house for the last time. From the first night, something felt off. I placed the doll on the top shelf of my bookcase, facing away from my bed. But when I woke up the next morning, she was turned toward me, her glassy eyes locked onto mine. At first, I thought maybe I'd imagined it, maybe I had set her that way, and just didn't remember. But when it happened again the next night, and the night after that, a deep unease settled into my bones. I started feeling watched. The air in my room felt heavier, the shadows darker. I told myself it was paranoia, that I was letting an old toy get to me. Still, I shoved the doll into my closet, burying her beneath blankets and boxes. It didn't matter. The next morning, she was back on my shelf, staring at me. I didn't tell anyone at first. I knew how it sounded. But when my best friend Naomi came over one night for a study session, she noticed it too. "That thing is creepy as hell," she muttered, giving the doll a wide berth. "Why do you even have it?" "My grandmother's," I mumbled, embarrassed. "I don't know why she left it for me." Naomi reached out to touch it, then jerked her hand back. "It's freezing," I frowned. My room wasn't cold, but when I reached out, she was right. The porcelain was ice cold to the touch. An uneasy feeling crawled up my spine. Naomi shivered. "Okay, nope, you need to get rid of that thing." I agreed. That night I took the doll outside. I walked to the nearest dumpster, pried off the lid and threw her inside. Relief washed over me as I walked back home, convinced that I'd finally rid myself of whatever was wrong with that doll. But when I woke up, she was sitting on my nightstand. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened as a wave of nausea rolled through me. My hands shook as I picked her up, my fingers aching from the cold porcelain. I told myself I was losing it, that I must have hallucinated throwing her away. Maybe I had been sleepwalking. Maybe Naomi was playing a prank on me. I didn't sleep that night. I tried everything. I buried her in the backyard. She came back. I drove 20 miles out of town and left her on the side of the road. She came back. I burned her, or at least I tried, but she wouldn't burn. I sat on the floor of my bedroom, staring at the doll in my hands, sobbing. The air around me felt charged, like static clinging to my skin. The room was too quiet, the silence pressing against my ears. That's when I heard the whisper. Not from outside, not from my phone, from inside my own head. Don't leave me. I was done pretending this was all in my imagination. Naomi, terrified by how I looked, pale, exhausted, shaken, convinced me to contact someone who could help. We found a woman named Celeste, a paranormal investigator with years of experience. When she stepped into my room, she didn't hesitate. "It's attached to you," she said immediately. "It won't let go." She refused to touch it. Instead, she performed a ritual, muttering incantations under her breath, placing symbols around the doll. I watched as a candle flickered violently, its flame dancing unnaturally high. Then, suddenly, it went out. Celeste's face was pale. "I can contain it," she said carefully, "but I can't destroy it. You have to be careful." She placed the doll in a box, covered in protective symbols, and took it away. I felt lighter than I had in weeks, like a weight had finally lifted. For the first time in months, I slept soundly. No whispers, no watching eyes, no unexplained movements, but peace never lasts, does it? 3 weeks later, Naomi called me in the middle of the night. I answered groggily, still half asleep. "Elise," she whispered, voice shaking. "It's here." My blood ran cold. "What?" "The doll," she breathed. "It's sitting on my dresser." I sat up, my entire body numb. "Naomi, listen to me. You need to get rid of it. Now," she whimpered. "I don't know how," and then I heard it. A soft tapping on my window. I turned my head slowly, my stomach twisting into knots, my breath hitched in my throat as I saw what was waiting for me. Sitting on my windowsill, eyes locked onto mine, was the doll. I don't know how it returned. I don't know what it wants. All I know is that it won't leave me. I don't take pictures of it anymore. I don't tell people about it, because every time someone sees it, every time someone knows about it, I know it will haunt them next.
Once innocent playthings, now vessels of fear. These haunted objects blur the line between ordinary and extraordinary, leaving behind fear, fascination, and unanswered questions. What connects them is the emotions they evoke: unnerving giggles, cryptic notes, inexplicable disruptions, or strange afflictions. All carry a dark legacy that refuses to be forgotten. Perhaps the true horror lies in what they reveal about our deepest fears. These stories remind us of the fragile line between belief and skepticism, reality and superstition. So next time you see a doll on a shelf or in a display case, ask yourself, is it just a doll or something more? And if you take a photo, will it let you leave unscathed? Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to Sterling Short Stories on YouTube, but only if you dare.